Hi, everybody. This is David Hobbs, and once again, I'm joined by Paul Spiteri, the CEO of the lending practice. And Paul, in our last conversation, we looked at how projects can go wrong and the root causes for those, and obviously the impact that has on all of those involved. But this time, I'd like to take a more positive spin. And we saw an article this week in relation to our friends and colleagues at BMO and having completed another successful merger with this time with Bank of the West. And on a transformational project such as this, often the primary focus, and rightly so, is on the migration and conversion of the data from a source system into a new system. But there are many other aspects in relation to the wider lending business that need to be considered and can sometimes go overlooked. And BMO certainly seem to have their act together when they're executing on such a merger and making sure that these points are considered. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what these key topics are and maybe focus on the most important ones of those.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, this was a great article to see. You know, we've worked with Bank of Montreal in several capacities over our career, starting with Loan IQ, and really have seen them go through multiple mergers. I think the first one I was involved with when I was a PM back with Loan IQ was Harris Bank in Chicago. They have experience in executing very effectively on mergers. As we both know, sometimes they come in unexpectedly, and sometimes obviously they're planned. Regardless, you know, the information and the timing that the banks have to get integrations done from a merger perspective varies, right? There's the time from approval, time that it's announced, and it has to be approved by the regulators, and then there's another set of timeframes to actually get integrated based on, you know, ultimately the banks who are in charge and what they decide to do. Within all of that, there's a lot of things that have to be reviewed, and I think the way that BMO has executed effectively over the years is there's a lot of focus on just getting the job done and pushing through. When you think about that approach, sometimes you can talk about things to a point where you don't execute, where they pretty much have a game plan. Recently, we've worked alongside of them with the Bank of the West merger in trying to just document and organize the approach to an integration of two large institutions, you know, with Bank of the West coming into BMO fold. And the article in American Banker was great because it showed that, you know, and our experience is on the commercial side, right? We're not experts on retail / consumer, you know, we are the commercial experts. And the things that you have to look at across the bank, you know, especially from a lending perspective, whether it's retail or wholesale, are relatively the same, but the scope of things are radically different. However, when we look at things from a commercial perspective, how can a bank go about a merger, whether it's under duress or with time, in a methodical way? A lot of times, people who are responsible for these integrations are people that have full-time jobs, whether leading tech or leading operations. It's similar, David, to projects that we do with customers, right? Where they're putting in new systems and, you know, we're begging for their time because you need their expertise to get the implementations done, but they got a day job to do. This is, you know, maybe even worse because you have the pressure from the top of the organization, from regulators to execute on this, and it could be a little bit of a mad scramble. Bank of Montreal, from their experience, you know, they have a lot of experienced executives, many who we know and work with, who across the entire organization, who are very efficient at executing here. And in this case, they learned a little bit from the prior mergers that at least we have been involved with working with them in different capacities. And they kind of wanted to look at things just like, you know, you have the people at the bank that know everything that needs to get done. But the problem is a lot of that sits here and it's not documented or written up in a run book or playbook, whatever you want to call it. And that's kind of what we did here. So we look at some of the things. It's kind of like, let's look at again, from a commercial perspective, but this could be potentially, you know, cut and paste to retail. But, you know, you start really with the life cycle of a loan, right? Always start there and you look at, you know, from a sales CRM perspective, what are the two banks using and doing? Now, Bank of Montreal's approach typically is things are going to land in their world, not oh, let's look at what the bank does that we're acquiring and change. There is some of that from what I've seen, but typically they're looking to bring them into the bank, not the other way around. But in order to do that effectively, you really have to look at everything in an organized way. And, and the approach that we kind of looked at with them was sales, CRM, start there. What's that process? What's the system of record? And then move it into underwriting, right? So kind of following along the life cycle of a loan, what processes. And we both know, David, this is where credit underwriting is where the roads get as diverse as they possibly can be because the lines of business that a bank would have. And one thing that I learned in this particular case in my exposure was there's sometimes new products that these banks that are they're being acquired have that the acquiring bank doesn't have. So that becomes not just a merger, becomes a difference, right? And how does that get rolled in? Or does it get, created separately or folded into a current line of business within the organization? Then we move to legal documentation and closing. Then the middle office, right? That feature function area that kind of boards and sits between ops and the front office or the bankers, for lack of a better term. Then you get into all the different servicing things. And then from after servicing, kind of the credit monitoring, administration, collateral, all that stuff that sits in the middle, and it's done a little bit by the front office and a little bit by the back office. Based on the bank, are they involved in loan trading? Which not every bank is involved in. If they are, it's different levels of it. Syndication, right? We have the situation where some banks will do a little bit of this. Someone like BMO has a very diverse portfolio in syndicated loans, from agency to trading to buying into large capital market transactions. There's the whole securitization side, which we didn't see a lot of in our career, but there's a CMBS and other products that are born off of loans being the underlying asset. We dealt with total rate of return swaps, which is, kind of fits in that mold a little bit. Then the ongoing portfolio monitoring management. And the last two things, which we see some of, but I know is a much bigger Pandora's box, the accounting within these organizations. How is, these are banks. This is about booking transactions and making money. How is the accounting folded together? And then lastly, from a financial regulatory reporting perspective, after all the things that are done and the other blue boxes that we just discussed briefly, that all has to flow into the mountains of reporting from a regulatory and financial perspective that every bank has to do. Most of them are publicly traded companies or have other financial and regulatory groups that they have to report to. So that comes at the end because you have to do all these other things prior. But these are a lot of heavy lifting items. And I think the important thing that we've learned, and I think Bank of Montreal does very well, is methodically going through these things, looking at the two organizations, but starting out, Dave, with the approach are things, meaning are systems of record, up for debate? Mm-hmm. If Bank of Montreal is a loan IQ shop, Bank of the West is an AFS shop from the back end perspective, that was decided to move on to loan IQ, right? That was because of BMO's approach. Another bank could say, hey, we have both. We want to make a decision on who survives, right? These are the things that if you have those processes or decisions in terms of the approach made up front, then it becomes an integration versus a debate. And if you have a debate or a bake-off, or whether it's a system perspective or whatnot, that's when time gets introduced, decisions, and people fighting. Listen, people are fighting for their turf, right? Quite honestly, we've seen that in many of our customers. So I think the interesting thing is ultimately having where is this going? Is it a merger? Is it of equals, or is it somebody acquiring someone else and it's going to be put through their way, and then ultimately it becomes an integration and conversion versus something in terms of, hey, what's the best of breed, right? That's another term that's used in our business.
So clearly having that methodical approach, having this framework in place is critical to make sure that you do at least consider and when necessary make those decisions up front, so that you can have a plan that you can then stick to, which would make the whole process easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing we can do with the lending practice is lend our experience to an organization. I think regardless of the size of the banks that are merging, the steps are the same. They just become, from a scope perspective, David, a lot simpler, right? If the portfolios aren't as robust. But most banks have a little bit of everything, right, in their portfolio. So you're going to have to dabble in all of this across the board. I mean, maybe a smaller bank may not be doing a lot of syndicating, a little trading, but the rest of the things are in play. And if it's two large banks, which I would predict, David, that we're not done seeing M&A in the banking industry in the U.S. I think we'll see more, quite frankly. I think it's quiet now. with the rate environment, but I don't think that's going to last. I think there will be some more consolidation of relatively large institutions in our country. So I don't think we've seen the last, and lending practice can certainly help banks kind of look at this Herculean task in some ways and try to provide guidance and a consultative approach to help execute within a timely manner.
Excellent. As always, good to hear your thoughts on this, Paul, and to the rest of you out there, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.